All right, good morning everyone. Let's get started here. Today we're going to continue talking about Linux fundamentals. We're going to review what we talked about before, looking at how to write a basic C program. We're going to look at C header files. We're going to look at basic data types, the printf function, and the man command. So, before we get started, any questions or concerns so far? All right. So looking again at our basic C program here, I'm just going to try and explain it one more time. So on line 1, we have an include statement, which allows us to use functions in our program. In order to use functions such as the puts function, we need to include the stdio.h. On line 3, our main function starts. Our main function is where the program execution starts. Functions have two brackets, one opening and one closing. After the first bracket, we can start executing statements. So the opening bracket can either go on line 4 or on line 3. It doesn't really matter. I personally prefer to put the opening bracket on the end of line 3. So we execute a statement on line 5, which outputs hello world to the terminal, and then we conclude our program on line 6 with a closing bracket. Yeah.
So is there like a place online or something, or is there like a list of like actions and stuff that you have?
We are on it today. That's what we were talking about today. So again, it's really important to be able to complete your program to know the Linux fundamentals. So just remember that the ls command shows files in the current directory. The touch command creates a blank file. rm removes a file. Make directory creates a file, or makes a directory. rm dir removes an empty folder. If your folder's not empty but you still need to remove it, you can do rm-rf and then space your folder name. So it would essentially look like rm-rf my folder. And that will remove the folder that you made and everything underneath it. The cd command lets you change directories. If you make a directory, you can change into it with cd. If you ever get lost or somewhere and you can't find where you're at, you can type cd without anything else attached to it, and you'll return to your home directory. So it's also important to look at the dot dot and dot. Dot dot represents the directory above your current directory. Let's say I cd'd to my dir. I can cd dot dot and return to the directory previous. And then the dot represents the current directory. So when we do /a.out to run our programs, or /hello, that means that we're looking in the current directory / our program name. Yep. So just remember, your username is lowercase when you're connecting to dev.dsunix.net. Right. And if you, let me find it here. So I made a document, posted on news earlier. If you forget any of the basics, you can go to the content section on week 1, and you can see connecting in Linux fundamentals. And that'll go through the very basics of connecting and using a Linux system. So, continuing on. So what is that stuff at the top? What's that studio.h mean? So basically, we need to instruct the system to allow us to use certain functions. And those functions are provided by the system. They perform special executions that aren't inherent to our program. So again, using that puts function, we can puts hello. We can use the printf function, which is the main thing we're going to talk about today, to also output hello. But there's also a bunch of different header files. There's header files like math.h, which allow us to do sine and take a number to a power. So the sine would, of course, calculate the sine of the number 1, and the power would take 2 to the power of 10. So there's a bunch of different header files. We'll talk about them throughout the course of this class. So data. Data is one of the main components of this class. So I think we're going to pretty much talk about 4 main types of data. There's strings, which are characters enclosed with double quotes. So everything inside that would be considered a string. There's also characters, which are single letters in single quotes. There's integers, which are basically whole numbers. And there's floating point numbers, numbers which have a decimal point. So how can we interact with those numbers? Well, we have a function called printf, and basically what it does is it takes a string and you pass it certain data types, and it replaces those format specifiers with that string. So, does my mouse come over on that screen? Yeah. So let's say I have this %s here. When we call printf, it will replace that %s with hello. It will replace this %c with a. It will replace that %i with 5. And it will replace that %f with 10.1. Now, in that original format string, we can specify those format identifiers as many times as we want to. We can have %s, %s, %s. Let's go over here and do printf %s, %s. And then we do comma, and we specify two strings. Let's say hello, and then world. And everything that we specify after the original string is separated by a comma. So the letters that we use are important too. So in order to print out a string, to have that %s replaced by that string, we need to use the %s. So when we use a %s, it's going to look for the first thing after the comma to be a string. And it's going to look for the second thing after the second comma to be a character. And if we use the wrong format identifier, the program's not going to print out what we want it to. So there's also a couple special characters allowed in any C string. There's a /n, which is a new line. Well, these are just a couple of them, but these are the key ones that you should know. There's /n, which equates to a new line, and /t, which equates to a tab. And they're much like the formatted identifiers. These are not literal characters. This %s and this %c is not printed out. It's interpreted by the system. So when we write a string like hello/n, and we use the puts function or the printf function to output that information to the terminal, what we're going to see is hello, and there's going to be a new line here, and the next line is going to start below it. Or when we do hello/t, what we're actually going to see is hello, and then five or six spaces, depending on whatever the system defaults are. So again, we can specify those characters within any kind of string. So the next thing I want to talk about is the man command. So on a Linux system, or on a Unix system in general, it is shipped with manual pages, and man is just short for manual. So if we want to know something about, let's say, the puts function, or the printf function, or even the ls or cd or touch commands, we can use the man command to look at it. So the two things that we're going to mainly look at, there's different sections for the man pages, as they're called. And the main two we're going to look at are number 1 and number 3. Number 1 are executable programs or shell commands, and shell commands are like ls, cd, and things like that. And 3 are library functions, which are like printf, puts, cosine, and power, like we looked at before. So in order to look at the documentation for those commands, we would do man, and then our section number, 1, and then ls. Let's say we want to look up ls. So we'll be showing how ls works on this system. And you can use the arrow keys to navigate up and down, and you can use the Q key to quit. So let's say I wanted to do man. So that's section 1. That's for ls, cd, make directory. But let's say I want to look at puts. So I'd specify section 3, which is library pages, and I'd say puts. Now, this page shows not just puts, but also other functions associated with puts. What we can see on right here that is exactly what puts does. And we can see exactly what header file we need to use at the top of our program to be allowed to use puts. So it says, these manual pages are written for professional programmers, but you can extract the information you need to know. You can see here, the function puts writes string s. And you can see up here, puts s. So that's that. And you can do this with basically any function you can run. You can use the C functions, again, manual page 3, and then whatever the function name is. Or if you want to do a Linux command, you can do man1 and then any of those commands. So what we're going to work on today is we're going to create a C program which prints out a string, a character, an integer, and a floating point number. So for reference here on the bottom side, I have listed the format identifier that you can use to build your string. And on the right side, I've put the basic C program. So, and then once you're done with it, submit it to day 3 in class. So, if we could go ahead and do that, that'd be great.